Sunday, and this feast day came about in 1925 when Pope Pius XI instituted this feast day of Christ the King, because he felt that the followers of Christ were being lured away by the increasing secularism in our world. And so he felt that people were choosing to live in the kingdom of the world than in the reign of God. And so it's an appropriate time of year as well, because we are transitioning from one liturgical calendar year into the next as we enter into the season of Advent next weekend with Advent 1. And we're going to have some different things happening. We're going to have different liturgical arts happening with there was some skits and such. And so I encourage you to come and see that as well. I'm excited about what's going to be happening and going on during that season. But it's this chance for us today is for us to be able to reflect on and think about how Jesus is in our lives and how He is Christ, how He is King over our lives. Interesting in John's Gospel is that when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, this is probably really the only real instance where he talks about this, but the other time when he starts to move into it a little bit is with Nicodemus. And Jesus is talking with these people in a way in which they're kind of two leaders comparing notes, right? Or sharing ideas. And these are the only times that Jesus talks about the kingdom of God in John's Gospel. It's kind of like when you start to, when two people that are in that same position in a company get together or meet up somehow and they start talking and comparing notes. And, first off they might be trying to garner some ideas for their own company, or next off they might be thinking, all right, here's my competition to get my next step up in that third company over here. Or when someone gets a new car, you start commiserating or talking about cars with other people, and everyone all of a sudden becomes an expert in this kind of that connecting point. Or today, I'm sure that there's a good football game on this afternoon, and so some of you will be talking about your team in the context and what needs to happen in order for your team or the other person's team to win. It's sizing each other up, it's sharing, it's engaging in conversation. So this is the only time that Jesus really starts to talk about the kingdom of God. It's when he's talking with the Jewish leaders, or when he's talking with the leader from the Roman Empire. The Jewish kingdom is represented by the Pharisees in John's Gospel, and Nicodemus represents this kingdom of the Jews. And then when we get to this scene, Jesus is talking with Pilate around the earthly empires, the kingdom or the Roman Empire. Now, really, what Pilate's doing, though, is he's protecting. Pilate wants to make sure that he is not going to be facing an unrest or an insurrection within his region. Jesus, though, has not come to talk about a kingdom that will threaten either of these other two in a way that they're concerned about. Jesus, instead, is showing what a kingdom of God might look like. A kingdom that's not opposite of these two known kingdoms, but it's different than these. It is really more than these kingdoms. So what does this world look like? What does this kingdom of God look like? In the secular world, we see the resources that we have and what is available, and think about how it is that we might shrink and keep what we have as ours and make sure to maintain it. Some of us in the last couple of days have seen the secular world played out, especially in all the ads that got stuffed in my mailbox this past weekend for shopping. Really, though, the kingdom of God focuses in, though, on why it was that we gathered around the table, many of us on Thursday afternoon. It is that spending time together. It's that relationship. Not necessarily power. The kingdom of God focuses on imagining what could be in the midst of hopelessness in our world. For instance, in the midst of the terror and bad things that are going on, in the secular world, we tend to focus on fear from violent acts such as the Jewish synagogue in Pittsburgh, the nightclub in Thousand Oaks, and let's not forget the yoga studio in Florida. The kingdom of God, instead, searches out and seeks for peace. The kingdom of God calls us to follow the Prince of Peace and to share that peace with others. The kingdom of God calls us to live with hope in a world, different world is possible. Christ, our King, calls us to be subjects in this kingdom, to bring about peace to the here and now, to stand against the fear that others might have us live in. And you and I standing up to the fear that we hear from others, to speak into that fear with peace and love, will change the world little by little. Richard Branson is quoted as saying, changing the world begins with a small group of people who simply refuse to accept the unacceptable. If you think about it, those are some pretty powerful words. People who stand up to what is unacceptable, to find what is needed in our world, those are the people that are going to change it. So when we see bad news happening, look for where the good is being played out. Make sure to point to where this good news is. And that when we see and hear of fear in other parts, that we talk about a king who died for us to give us peace in our hearts in the midst of ridicule. Maybe even when there's the abuse of power or the overuse of fear to keep people in line. That despite all of this fear, you and I have chosen to live differently. Trusting that despite this fear, God still has us. Christ is our King, leading us in a kingdom that is even better. And we are called to share this kingdom with others. But what does this kingdom look like? Or what does it feel like? I want to point out one word that I've said a couple times already, and that's kingdom. And some scholars, in reference to this Christ, their King, or the kingdom of God, have talked about how this word kingdom needs to be changed a little bit. That there's one little letter that should be dropped out, and it should be kingdom. Kingdom, K-I-N-D-O-M. And real quick, I just returned from North Carolina visiting with family where kin is more the acceptable word that's used, and you don't just say kin, you say can. So it's regularly used to mean family. And kin is about relationship. And who it is that you are in a relationship with. And there's something about kin, right? I mean, if you really think about it, it's sometimes odd, that whole idea of kin and kinship. I mean, it's a relationship that we have for almost no other reason than we might have come from the same mother, or had the same bloodlines or extended family. And when you think about it, sometimes, my brother and I talk about, we wouldn't be friends if we didn't know each other outside of family, but we love each other, we care about each other, we talk on occasion, and it's nothing bad. It's just we probably wouldn't be in a relationship at all. It's because we've married into these extended families, or there's some sort of history that we have together. But there are many, and I'll acknowledge too that there are some that have strained relationships. But for many, these relationships we probably would not have had it not been for our blood relations. And so when we gather and relate in these reunions, we see a gamut of different people. We see a gamut of different attitudes and life choices, and we talk with these people, and things are okay. And so when we consider kin in the context of the kingdom of God, we can look to Christ our King in the way that he saw kin. And he saw everyone as kin. And he especially went out of his way to make a connection in contact with the kin, even the ones on the margins, or that cousin that we all kind of mumble about and talk poorly about, and then because they haven't made the right decisions and maybe have made some transgressions against us. But Jesus, in those instances, doesn't just kind of like keep mumbling about that cousin. Jesus actually goes to that cousin and lifts them up. He supports them and cares about them. He's willing to walk with them. And the willingness to enter these relationships makes the kingdom of God not just opposite of these other kingdoms. It just makes them different and even better. And so, he's really showing us, Jesus is showing us, that even in the face of fear, even in the face of differences, that we are to change this and to love each other fiercely. To allow Jesus to work through us with care and authenticity. And this can happen in many and different and very fascinating ways. This 6 or 7 or 8 years ago that I went with a group of people and went down to a ministry in Los Angeles called the Dream Center. And I think I've shared this story before, but to me it's still a powerful story reminder of how bringing someone into kinship can be powerful. It can be life-changing, and it can be done in a way that physically changes someone. So Julie and I were paired up. We were doing a ministry that walked the streets around Skid Row, where people just get dropped off from the hospitals and just dropped there because there's several missions and ministries there. And so what we were doing with the Dream Center was we were walking down the streets. We were sharing water with people and sharing chips with the homeless that were living on the streets, and just feeding them, giving them water. It's LA, and it's just hot and dry, and so people needed this. And so at the end of our walk, we ended up in front of one of the missions, one of the buildings where a lot of homeless might stay for the night. And we were standing there and chatting, and Julie, the person that I was paired with, she just kind of zeroed in on one person and started talking with them. And eventually found out that his name was Samson. Now Samson was initially just sitting in a wheelchair, and he was just huddled over. He couldn't get any further over in his huddle, and he's just kind of looking around and making sure no one is going to hurt him or attack him, but he's just kind of scared, and you almost didn't even notice him in his spot, and so he's just sitting there. And Julie came up eventually, and she started talking with Samson and just listening to him. And as Julie's talking to him, and he's kind of starting to share his life, you could, minute by minute, you could see almost like a degree per minute as Samson physically started to sit up more and more and more and more. Eventually, he's sitting upright. Over the course of 30 minutes, he's just kind of moved from hunched over to feeling sitting up. And what I sincerely believe is that he was brought into kinship. People started to see him. People noticed him. And it's something that he hadn't experienced on those streets for quite some time. And so as he was being brought into it, he was being noticed, and he started to see that Christ was working in and through Julie as she started to care about him and listen to him, to hear his story and who he was and where he came from. And he allowed us to see the child of God that he was, and that changed him. That changed his life, that changed his physical demeanor. Speaking and loving him. It was awesome. And we too, in this room, are called to do this same type of work as subjects of Christ the King. To bring into kinship others with us, regardless of who they are. Any secular king probably would have just simply flown over in their helicopters or whatever and never would have set foot on those streets with its homeless, with its crack addicts. But this is